I'm sorry I didn't announce it, but we will do this whole session in English. I hope it's okay with everyone. So I shall start already in English. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. I'm Jana from Friends of Palestine. We invited our distinguished guest, Stephen Kapos, for this event. You may have attended yesterday, the march, and later on in Lucerne, the concert for the lost childhood, especially in Gaza, because there is going still ongoing genocide. I want to also point your attention to the fact that we're still a small group which is trying to raise awareness to what's been happening in Palestine, not only since October 7, but since 48 and even before. And we've been active since 17 years ago, I believe, now. But we definitely need support. Bringing Stefan and all these activities we've been doing. So if you have any way of supporting us a little bit financially, we will very much appreciate it. Just by buying the books, you will already support us. So thank you so much, and I will proceed to the main part of this evening. Oh my God. Excuse me. So, Stephen, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor, really, to come. And I am a child survivor of the Holocaust, Budapest. Since 1944. March 1944 was the date when the German army invaded Hungary and Budapest, and the Jewish population suddenly had a further downturn of their security and well-being. It was quite difficult before. Hungary had quite a authoritarian regime even before. Some describe it as semi-fascist. Certainly they were allies of Hitler.
People don't hear you. We have to try this one.
Any better? Yes. Sorry. Shall I say it again?
You can,
yeah.
if you want.
Anyway, the gist of it is that in March 1944, the German army invaded Budapest and Hungary generally, because although officially Hungary, which had an authoritarian right-wing regime, was allied to Germany, and in fact took part in the invasion of the Soviet Union in 41, I think it was. And there was a deal between the Hungarian leader called Admiral Horthy and Hitler, that for Hungary's joining the military adventure of attacking the Soviet Union, in return various territories of Hungary that were detached as part of the Trianon peace treaty after the First World War, where Austria-Hungary was one of the major losers of the war, alongside Germany. And the sort of relevance to my family has been that they were farmers in Transylvania, And the part of Transylvania, not all of Transylvania was returned to Hungary, but the part that was where they were living and farming. And immediately when the Hungarian regime took over and came in, their position became extremely precarious. Eventually, they were in fact all deported to Auschwitz. And altogether, with some from the southern part of Hungary, my family had 15 members who perished in Auschwitz.
You said that we will mention what it means to fight for humanity during genocide. Can you speak about people who, in your time, helped you actually survive? Who was those people who fought for humanity then? And do you see such people today?
Well, as I said, I was a child, I was 7 years old, and I was rescued in a way by being taken in October 44 to a home which was devoted to saving Jewish children on false papers. We all had false names and false papers, and we were partly under the protection of the Swiss Red Cross. It was a combination of the Hungarian, some of the Hungarian Protestant churches. There were two major Protestant churches, the Reformed Church, which were Calvinist, and the Lutheran Church, which were called evangelist. But that had a different meaning then than it has now. So, and at the early stages, before the Germans came in, for Jewish people to evade some of the penal laws that were passed against Jews, one approach was to convert to Christianity. At the early stages, this had provided a certain protection, which didn't last, but for a period it did. And the bishop of the Lutheran Church, the evangelicals, a great man, a great humanitarian called Pastor Gabor Stelo, was commissioned by his bishop to organize support for and rescue for the Christian Jews who converted to that church. That's how it started, this action. But because Pastor Stelo was a great humanitarian, although it started aiming at only selectively to the converted Jews, he then extended it way beyond that. And in the end, setting up more and more homes, all of them supported also by the Swiss Red Cross, which had a very brave emissary organizing. Together, they saved 2,000 children, which was an amazing feat. And he is now very much appreciated as a hero of the Holocaust. And one of the boys that he saved became a quite well-known sculptor, and he designed a monument for Gabor Stelo, which is in the heart of Budapest today. It's a kind of semi-abstract monument, but very successful in my opinion. Anybody who is interested to see it, I can send a picture of it by email if you ask Jana. So Gabor Stelo has been given a tree in sort of little forest of the righteous at Yad Vashem. He was appreciated generally, not only by the Hungarians. And apart from him, that there were other extremely brave people. A family friend, not a relation, a Christian family friend called Emil Wismayer was a printer, and he printed a number of books, produced books of poetry and all kinds of cultural items. But at night, he was printing, in his printing works, printing false documents for Jews to save them. And that was an extremely significant action.
Stephen, you said you see parallels. Stephen, you said you see parallels.
You can't shoot. I think it will be.
Hello. You said you see parallels between. Can I use your microphone? Stephen, you said you see parallels in what happened during the Holocaust with what's been happening in Gaza and in Palestine. And can you, after addressing that, can you speak about those who are standing up for humanity today, where you see them, who they are amongst you, your group, of course?
Well, I realized that the worst aspect of Holocaust is extremely visible, and everybody knows about it. When you say the term Holocaust, most people would have images in their minds about the gas chambers and the executions where particularly in Belarus and Ukraine, the German troops, the Einsatz group, were shooting people straight into ditches and so on. That is the most horrible and standard image of what the Holocaust represents. But the Holocaust also had sufferings and pains that are less visible. And one of these is, and they are, I think, similar in Gaza as well, is what happens to families, the division of families into uncertain parts. In my case, I was in one place, my sister was somewhere else being hidden, and my father was in Belsen or Theresienstadt, although he came back, but we were dismembered. And I think this is happening to families in Gaza as well, that they cannot always stay together. In fact, some parents I know write names on the limbs of children and divide them into separate pieces so that some should survive. And then a particular problem is what to do with the disabled within a family. If you have a disabled member and you have a sudden order from your enemy to get up and move within 24 hours into an unknown new destination, well, not everybody can actually do this. If you have a disabled member of the family, and usually there is no transport for this dislocation, what do you do? And it's an incredibly painful decision, either to leave somebody behind on their own, or the whole family staying, exposing themselves to bombardment. Now, there's something similar happened to my own family, the Transylvanian ones I mentioned earlier. There was a disabled member, an elderly uncle, and when the Romanian workers, because the Romanians also worked in the village that they found, as well as Hungarians, it's half and half, and particularly the Romanian workers approached them to say, Now that this area has gone over to the Hungarians, you would be much safer in Romania rather than here under the Hungarian fascist regime. So we could take you over by horse and cart in a particular route we know. It's bumpy, but we could take you to the Romanian border and you would be safe. They turned down this offer because they felt that the sick member of the family, the elderly person, couldn't take a bumpy ride. And later, all of them were taken to Auschwitz, and just one person survived. A cousin who was a teenager, a young teenage girl at the time. He was put to work in a warehouse, in a warehouse in Auschwitz, to sort the clothes that were left behind after the use of the gas chambers. And they were asked to take their clothes off way before, because they were full to be taken to showers and so on. And many of them did believe that. And then they collected the clothes afterwards, and they, in these warehouses they were sorting them. Some items were used by the army, and warmer items. And this cousin on one day had to sort her own parents' clothes, which must have been a tremendous trauma. And but eventually she survived. But one of the interesting aspects of this story is that whilst she got liberated and returned to Transylvania, which was by then reattached to Romania, so suddenly it was Romanian again, and through Romania managed to get to, and could only go to, Israel. When I visited them in the early 60s, I found that she and other members of the family were all Zionists and racist, and I just couldn't understand how, with that background, you could think the way they did. But I think it's partly the drip propaganda that they were continually exposed to, and partly the fear that was artificially created and maintained by the Zionist regime, that the local population, the indigenous Palestinian population, Arabs as they called them, were all out for revenge, and they are mortal danger to you all the time, which I'm convinced was complete lies.
Can you describe that particular moment, because I heard you talk about it, when you realized that when you were watching TV together?
Yes, well, yes. I was visiting, as well as this cousin that I mentioned, I was also visiting my aunt Zelma, who was elderly by then, but she was somebody who behaved extremely bravely during the Holocaust in Budapest. She was in Budapest then, Aunt Zelma. And she was part of this rescue setup, but had various brave actions at various times. And she also ended up via Romania, Transylvania, back to Israel. And on one occasion when I was visiting her and staying with her, we were watching the news, and there was a Palestinian demonstration going on. And suddenly, at one point, helicopter gunships appeared over them, and apparently shooting into them. I suppose they were rubber bullets, but still, it's bad enough. And I was completely horrified. And she turned around and said, "Well, what's your problem? They are Arabs." And I could not understand how you could reach that level starting from being a victim yourself. But there you are, the power of propaganda, I suppose.
That part of propaganda, big part, is dehumanization. Do you see parallels again?
Yes. The dehumanization in Hungary started with passing discriminatory laws. Hungary, the right wing in Hungary was very proud of the fact that they passed the first racist law in Europe before Mussolini, where they limited the number of entries of Jews into professions by a particular level. And in fact, my father, who was studying medicine at the time, in 1 year couldn't continue because he became surplus to requirement in that year. And so where did he continue? In Prague. And he went to a university in Prague, which was German language university. And so he didn't lose a year. And he said he thoroughly enjoyed himself in Prague. And compared the Czech population favorably to the Hungarian ones, I must say. And so that is that family connection. He became a qualified doctor and a GP, and later studied further and became a psychoanalyst. And then during the communist period, when that wasn't acceptable, he retrained again and he became a public health officer. But talking about the dehumanization, one very obvious aspect of it was the laws passed that all Jews had to wear the yellow star. This was after the Germans came in. And I, although a 7-year-old, had to wear the yellow star myself. And I often mention the experience of watching television last year and watching a report of the Security Council meeting where, when it was the turn of the Israeli representative, before he started speaking, he stood up and very theatrically put on a yellow star, which I found absolutely sickening, because it was an obvious exploitation for political purposes of the Holocaust experience and the dehumanization that we then had to suffer. We also had to live in a house beyond a certain day, which was marked with a large yellow star, which was preparatory to collecting people up for deportation. But because it was so late stage in the war and various international pressures, the Hungarian Jews weren't deported wholesale. There were about 200,000 Hungarian Jews in Budapest at the time. But when the out-and-out fascist group, the Arrow Cross, took power, the Arrow Cross Party, which had their armed militias. And these armed militias, from October, November 44, were marauding in the town and virtually hunting Jews. And so we did have a lot of victims, but not large numbers in the way that they deported people from the countryside. Adolf Eichmann was stationed in Budapest, and he organized the first big transportations from the countryside, which were very quick deportation of 430,000 Jews, and very, very few of them survived.
There was actually, shall we mention the deal we said we will maybe like leave it for another discussion, but...
Well, very briefly, because it's a complicated deal. There was a very prominent Zionist Jew by the name of Rudolf Kastner, or Rezher Kastner. He's called by various names, but Kastner was his surname. He was well connected with the Jewish leadership. Zionist leadership, sorry. Yeah. He came up from Transylvania and presented himself to the Hungarian Jewish leadership. They weren't necessarily Zionists then. And he obtained a license from the leadership to negotiate with the Nazis. And he did negotiate with Himmler via Adolf Eichmann. And the proposal was that a certain number, about 1,600 Hungarian, mostly Transylvanian elite Jews or professional Jews, would be saved and transported to eventually to Switzerland via Belgium, and 2 transports already was played out. The deal was that in return for this, the Hungarian Jews organized delivery of a fair number of trucks for the German army to be used on the Eastern Front, and supposedly this was to be financed by the Western powers, and also various material like textiles and jewelry and money in return for saving 1,600.
Sorry, but to be our joint friend. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And what we heard actually even from Rudolf Vrba, who was the Slovak survivor and escapee from Auschwitz, they were dictating a report at this time, the same time as Kastner was making this deal. And they were dictating their experience and actually what was happening in Auschwitz, this extermination, that it was an extermination camp, not a work camp. And part of the deal was that this, Tony says, and Vrba also says, that the leadership of this Judenrat was Zionist, and that the deal was that they suppressed the information about what was truly going on in Auschwitz and the other camps as well, obviously. So hundreds of thousands of Jews from Hungary went on, including your family, went on the train.
This was from Transylvania. That relates to the Transylvania. He was Transylvanian, okay. and the saved people. And the saved people were to be predominantly Transylvanian, and this was a Transylvanian action, and my family was got involved with it because they had Transylvanian connections. So personally, I was in one of the collecting camps of Kastner, set up in Budapest, which was a privileged sort of camp, not the usual camp, which was guarded by the SS on the outside to keep people out rather than in. And it was difficult to enter it by negotiation, but you could leave it at any time. And my family was in there, I was in there for a temporary period. And one of the difficulties is that information, what you can rely on, whether this is a reliable project or not, was all by rumors, basically. You couldn't be certain of anything. So my family left the camp. And this is when I was taken up and on false papers, etc., to be hidden. But the male members of my family returned later to that camp, and my father and two uncles were transported with the idea of getting to Switzerland. And this was the last Kastner transport, and got stuck in Belsen, which was meant to be via Belsen. The previous lot did go via Belsen, but they got stuck there because Hitler discovered this project. Himmler did know about it, but Hitler did not. And apparently Himmler very nearly got arrested for this, and we barely survived it. And they stopped the transfer to Switzerland. So my father and his group remained in Belsen, a camp within a camp. The Nazis, whilst not delivering the original deal, they had a degree of pedantic observation of a contract that they entered. So they were treated as hostages rather than normal inmates. And their camp was divided by barbed wire from the rest. And they saw, my father said, they saw incredible dehumanization across the barbed wire of people in nearly animal state and being beaten by Kapos, sometimes beaten to death. And in the middle of winter, he was then transferred later to Theresienstadt. You call it Terezin, I think.
Terezin.
Yes. And on the way, he saw in Belsen, as he was leaving, groups of frozen dead bodies stacked like logs in large groups.
Actually, we can see similar things even happening in Gaza when they're using the excavators to move some of the bodies. So there you have parallels as well. We said we will try to speak more about the current situation, because this is the most alarming and we are living through a genocide right now. So I wanted to ask you, what do you feel that people, ordinary people, could have done to stop then and now? Probably doesn't differ too much. And you also said that you have really red flags when you recognize fascism.
Yes.
Where do you see it? Where do you have the red flags today?
Obviously, one of the reasons why fascism triumphed in Germany is because the left was divided, and the Social Democrats and the Communists did not unite against the rising fascist party. And had they been united, quite possibly they could have prevented the triumph of the fascist party and their taking power. And I feel that fascism, with an incremental series of laws, is advancing in stages. It doesn't suddenly drop out of the sky. And I think that one of our important duties is to recognize the early signs of a travel in the direction of fascism, the early incremental periods, and not tolerate it by coming out on the streets and acting, if necessary, even by means of civil disobedience. And I think that we can see in certain countries a more advanced stage towards a movement towards fascism rather than in my country, although there are signs there as well. But I would pick out Germany as an example, where you are not allowed to even show a Palestinian flag, where the police brutalizes the protesters and beat them up. I talked to German woman activist who had been nearly choked by the police, and that is clearly a way towards, on the way to a repeat of fascism, and brave people do stand up against it, but it has to be with increasing numbers. And in the United States, you see, on student campuses, similar action, brutalized police and so on.
What about putting groups as Palestine Action outside of the law?
Well, that is a sign of the scare, of the fear of the official establishment in the sight of, first of all, the very large repeated demonstrations that we have in London. They are enormous in size, varies between 300,000 at the maximum, nearly 1 million people out on the streets with their flags and chants, and repeating months after month. There has never been such a consistent turnout of a large number of people protesting. Now, whilst the government is trying to ignore it, papers don't report it properly, the BBC ignores it. On a recent occasion, we had 500,000 people marching, and the BBC did not include it in the news items.
Know something about that, even though we don't have 500,000,
yeah.
but even when it's thousands.
It's obviously, the BBC claims for itself complete neutrality, and of course it isn't. It's been an enablers, both the BBC and the mainstream press were active enablers of the genocide which is going on in Gaza. If they had been reporting it from the beginning, the way the amount of killings and the killing of children, and brought it to the public, it might have never got to the stage that we see today, because the public would have been would have arisen in much larger numbers, even greater than it was. Even this number that we produce in London months after months does worry the establishment, because it has electoral implications. At last election, a large number of, well, for historic context, fairly large number of independents were beating the Labour opponents, and I think this is going to grow, and they worry, immensely concerned about all this, and this is why they have been trying to, and did crack down on a smaller group called Palestine Action, who felt strongly that even protesting in a legal manner is not sufficient enough, and they were prepared to go beyond that and take the consequences. And that has a tradition in the United Kingdom. Early on, even in the 50s, the anti-nuclear demonstrations often went into civil disobedience. Even I remember seeing the great philosopher Bertrand Russell sitting down in the street protesting and inviting arrest, and indeed he was arrested, and they would get a very small sentence, and that would be the end. However, because Palestine Action has been spraying and damaging, spraying aeroplanes that might have been used in action in Gaza, at the factories where they were being assembled, and also damaging at times the Israeli Elbit factories. I think, following the strong influence of Israel and the Israeli lobby, they were arrested. But prior to that, the government brought in, years ago, a very draconian law against terrorism, the anti-terrorist legislation. But when that was brought in, it was with assurance that it would not be used against protesters, but against genuine terrorists. And now those laws are being used against these protesters. And they are risking a sentence of imprisonment of 14 years. That's the maximum they could have. And but there is a perfectly legal action or movement in trying to protest and claim that they should be deproscribed, and that is legal. On the other hand, to say anything or display anything that is on the face of it supportive of that group would mean that whoever displays such notice would himself or herself be subject to the terrorist legislation and arrested as a terrorist, which is absurd, but that's what's going on.
So you could be arrested on this?
Sorry?
So you could be arrested for supporting?
Not if this talk is not repeated in London. Try not to. Don't send it there. And but right now, I say now, tomorrow actually, as a side show of the big demonstration that's repeating again tomorrow in London, there will be those brave people who will be displaying their support for this group, the Palestine Action Group, and they are asking to be arrested under the terrorist legislation. Last time they did this, there were 500 who did it, and they all got arrested. Tomorrow it is planned to be 1,000, and maybe even more. So it will be interesting. They are trying to grow beyond the number that the police and the courts can cope with.
Yes.
I am not advocating that anybody should join it.
Just saying.
I emphasize that. It is merely reporting what's going on.
You're still joining these marches, these huge marches, with the group of Holocaust survivors and their descendants. What's the main message you're trying to communicate when you have...
Well, yes, we have very specific reason to do that. I'd first explain that the group has not been started by me, but I joined it when it was very small. First about 3 people. The original organizers were Chaim Brashith, you may have heard of, and Mark Atkind, who is a very active organizer of it. You probably haven't heard of because he's a very retiring type. But they started to stand by the side of the big demonstration with a placard saying, we are descendants of Holocaust against the genocide in Gaza. And the purpose of it is to show that not all Jews automatically support Israel or Israel's policies and the genocide, because the propaganda, particularly the Zionist propaganda, tries to represent the Jews as a homogeneous group, all completely committed for Israel. This is complete lies and rubbish, and we try to prove that. Also, the marches are have been accused falsely of being anti-Semitic, and of course us being there, declaring who we are and being welcomed, sometimes quite moving way. People thank us for being there and doing it. Instead, the group has grown, and where it is only started only with the descendants of survivors, now we have 2 survivors as well, of which I am one. And the other one was a baby during the Holocaust, but still she's a child survivor. And we have grown to 20, 30 in size, and not all of them out at these occasions at the same time, but we have tremendous reception, and sometimes people even break down crying. We're so thankful that we make that point. And the right wing and the right Jewish Zionist organizations say these are no-go areas for Jews, and there we are, welcomed.
At these marches and many pro-Palestine events you joined, you met certainly a number of Palestinians. What's your impression of Palestinians?
Well, I think the most important overriding impression I have is that when I met Palestinians, either in Israel or in London or UK or whenever I was traveling, not one of them did I find to be revengeful or aggressive. I've drawn the conclusion that they are a most remarkable, peaceful people, the very opposite of how they are represented. And this propaganda that a possible one-state solution would mean the massacre of the Jews is absolute rubbish, I'm convinced. It's as much rubbish as it was when they said the same in the context of South Africa, that all the whites would be killed or something. Not at all. And in fact, I find it a puzzle. I don't fully understand how a people who have been so badly used, so much, suffered so much, can remain as peaceful as they are. And I was thinking that if the similar treatment was meted out to Hungarians, they would be quite different. And
so would be the Czechs.
Yes.
Which we saw in the Sudetenland.
Yeah. So anyway, I have great admiration for them as a nation and a group, and individually. I met some wonderful activists who risk everything. Whenever I meet Palestinian activists speaking at the same platforms as I do, they invariably have 20, 30, maybe 50 victims in their families. And yet they carry on and so on. One particular Palestinian I met has organized, I think it's in Liverpool, I'm not quite sure in which town now, because I've been touring about 8 or 9 towns last month. He organized a reconstruction group that as schools are being destroyed in Gaza today and yesterday, this group has fundraising activities and start rebuilding schools in Gaza now, today. And I find that absolutely amazing. At the risk that it may be destroyed as well, but they will do it again if it was. So the resilience of these people is just amazing. And of course, I've heard discussions from Palestinian doctors who had years or year and a half in Palestinian hospitals describing how they had to operate, the conditions, the lack of anesthetics, and what they saw. It's just extraordinary that the bravery that they continue doing it, and also what they had experienced and survived it.
You also told me you spoke with, you have a friend, I don't remember if he or she is in Gaza right now, but you know, a lot of activists become very helpless when you have 500,000, maybe million even people in the streets, and still maybe the rhetoric of the government changed, but not the actions. Here at most we had almost 2,000 at one march, and there's not even change in the rhetoric.
Yeah.
But the importance of those.
Yeah. I am a member of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign organization, which is one of the main sponsors of these big demonstrations. And we have a local branch. I live in Camden area of London. If you know London, you probably know where it's usually famous for the Camden Market, if nothing else. But it's a large district of London. And we have a Camden branch of Palestine Solidarity Campaign group. And we have kind of an honorary member from Jaffa, a Palestinian teacher, who is linked into our meetings. We have monthly meetings, and he's linked into our meetings every time. And he gives us report of what is happening around him. And it's extremely valuable for us to have a sense of what it is like to live under these conditions. And he assured us that they are aware of and follow the big marches that we have in London. And it means a great deal to them. Because many people are so frustrated that we march time and again and nothing changes. We haven't saved a single life. And he said, don't think that, because it is immensely helpful for us in the West Bank and Gaza. And just keep doing it and so on. And I am also convinced that whilst it appears that it has no impact, actually the governments are extremely concerned about it, as they show with some of their attitudes which arises out of fear more than anything else. And I think that what we can practically do to further help the people in Gaza and hasten the end of this torture of the people is to grow our numbers, because nothing scares the government more than seeing however large our demonstrations are, that they are also growing actively. And this is practical work that we can all do everywhere in trying to reach out to sympathetic people, sympathetic to our cause, and there are a huge number and not yet active, and try to get them to join us to become active. One of the simple ways of doing it is having petitions with street stalls which sign up people towards a particular petition, and they give contact details. And then follow up on the contacts and talk to them and ask them to be, if they are sympathetic, to be also active. And this is actual practical work that we can do everywhere. And it's important to grow our numbers, I think. I can't think of a better way of increasing chances of pressure on the government. And this policy has been embraced also by the Stop the War Coalition, the other big sponsor of the marches. And their sort of radical group called Counterfire. They all agree that this is the way to go.
There were more important, I had a few more questions, but are there questions right now? Or should I carry on with a few more? And you will prepare some, maybe? Okay, there was one other topic I wanted to ask you about because you have your experience with it as well, and that's the new Zionist definition of anti-Semitism, which helps to deflate what anti-Semitism is, in fact, and to silence people who are advocating for Palestine. And that's the, excuse me, and that it's called IHRA, IHRA w Czeszczynie, to czytamy. And in Czech parliament it was already years ago passed without any discussion that yes, this is the new and correct definition of anti-Semitism.
Yeah. Yes. This definition is extremely dangerous. It's a definition with a number of examples attached. The examples are even worse than the definition. The main author of the definition has since criticized it himself and said that he would never intended the definition to be used in the way that it has been used. The chief negative of the definition is that it conflates being Jewish with Zionism. That it assumes that any criticism of the Israeli state or Zionism is anti-Semitic. And there are examples that show that. And there was a very big fight over this within the Labour Party. I was then still a member of the Labour Party. And this was one of the critical fights. The left in the Labour Party realized the dangers of this definition and tried to resist it. And Jeremy Corbyn, who was then the leader of the Labour Party, wanted to add to it certain qualifications to say, notwithstanding whatever is in this definition, it is not anti-Semitic to criticize the policy of Israel and Zionism. And there was a big smear campaign against him around that time, and said that proved that he himself was anti-Semitic, etc. And eventually, this was passed by the Labour Party as a national executive, as adopted as a definition. But it is, in legal terms, a very weak document. It's not been useful to legislate with. The Labour Party, at that time, as factional infighting, they used anti-Semitism as a fight against the left, basically. And they were trying to find tweets and past statements by individuals which could be regarded as, because of criticism of Israel, anti-Semitic, and to be disciplined and eventually thrown out of the party as anti-Semites. What happened in practice is that every time they started something like that, a case against an individual for anti-Semitism, when it was reaching court, if it was resisted, and lawyers were called in defense, the party typically switched the claim against the individual not as anti-Semitic, but bringing the party into disrepute, because that was very easy to work in the courts. Whereas the definition, if they were to rely on he is anti-Semitic, by this definition, the definition was never good enough to stand up for examination. So they dropped it. Unfortunately, the conservative government has requested that state institutions and universities adopted. They didn't demand it outright, but they linked it with funding, that if you resist it, you might be cut off from funding and so on. So there have been a lot of fights in academia over this definition, and also local authorities. My own council, Camden Council, adopted the IHRA definition. And they said when they adopted it that they will monitor its impact, and there will be a re-debate and revision, which they never actually kept to. So this has been an immensely damaging thing. It started in the Labour Party and then the United Kingdom, and I think across the world, in Canada, US, everywhere. Because the Zionists who have propagated this have, in my opinion and in general opinion, have been heavily compromised by their support for the genocide, weakened, morally destroyed actually. It is now the good time to refight the issue of the definition, particularly as there is an alternative definition called the Jerusalem Declaration, which does not conflate Zionism, criticism of Israel and Zionism with anti-Semitism. And the official attitude has been to just ignore it, like they ignore the demonstrations. But it is there, it has been worked on by a large number of international scholars, and it should be re-fought, this particular battle.
As you know...
My father, excuse me, are you think that now you are anti-Semitic?
Mohammed asked if Stephen considers himself to be anti-Semitic now, saying that...
Anti-Zionist, yes.
I've got a question. Well, I thought always that the German... Can you hear me? Well, the Germans always talked about Judenhass, right? Which is hate of Jews. Hello? Okay. So, and then I don't remember who it was, but a German, I don't know if you can call them scholar, just rename it as anti-Semitism. Judenhass equals anti-Semitism. And I read somewhere that the Jews, Hebraic language, the Arabic and Armenian, it's Semitic.
Yeah.
So they are Semites. So why do we subscribe at all? Because I'm pro-Palestinian, I'm pro-Armenian, so I can't be anti-Semitic. I would say that's my logic.
Yes.
So why do we subscribe to
Well,
that?
Well, I think, strictly speaking, you are correct, but in politics, terms acquire new meanings, and I think now the general use of it is not exact as you say.
But it should be, right?
Well, yes, but you can't re-educate the whole world suddenly about the term. What you can do is to fight off the actual definition that is wrong in terms of legality. The English dictionary, the Oxford English Dictionary, defines concepts. And in that dictionary, the word anti-Semitism is defined as hatred of Jews as Jews. End of story. That is a perfectly sufficient definition of anti-Semitism. There was never a need for a complicated new definition. But to go back to actually using it in a totally different sense, as you say, which is the original sense, would be extremely hard in terms of international information.
I heard Ilan Pape talking about the genocide in Gaza, and he described it as part of a process of decolonization, is the way he sees it. And I think it was also Ilan Pape, or perhaps another analyst, who compared it to Vietnam. That was very surprising for me. But they draw the comparison that the war in Vietnam, where there had been a war, I think already in the 1940s up to 1975, led to an independent Vietnam, not influenced by Americans, and was ended by a military defeat and a political decision in America. So I'm just wondering if you think, what you think about that analogy, and could it be seen the same way in Palestine?
Well, yes, I think there is in fact a parallel that ever since the Balfour Declaration and the appearance of large number of Jews in Palestine was a colonial project with all the characteristics of a colonial project. And in a sense, the liberation of the Palestinian people could therefore be regarded as an anti-colonial, in political terms, movement. Now, the parallel with the Vietnam, obviously, the Europeans appearing to stop the communist influence of the North against the South, which is how it started, is again a colonial interference with the internal matters of an Asian country. So that is that colonial similarity. And the way that the Vietnamese people finally threw off that attack on them is in a sense decolonization as well. But it's also linked with other political concepts. The US was quite deliberately afraid of what was then called the domino effect, that it was sort of, in a geopolitical sense, a communism, anti-communism conflict as well. And the US was particularly concerned that if the South Korea or South Vietnam fell into communism, other countries would follow in Asia, and that would be a domino effect, Cambodia and so on. So there was that aspect to it as well. It was more complicated.
Are there any UK organisations or maybe even councils that have adopted the Jerusalem Declaration? Is there a movement to get it adopted in more places?
Not to my awareness, actually. I don't think so. Had there been one, it would have been big news. And no. But I think the time is ripe for forcing councils to reconsider their acceptance, especially in the light of its pro-Zionist document, the IHRA, and the Zionists now have been revealed as genocidal belief and ideology. So it is the right time to say, how can we continue to accept such a definition which is inspired by and serving Zionists I think we can do it. And there are signs that certain universities have been reconsidering, and it created a great hoo-ha when they did so recently, and refighting. And I think they went for the Jerusalem one instead.
I can just speak loudly. I wanted to ask, because we talked a lot about Zionism, if you think that there is actually an alternative to it that have a potential to maybe change Israel and its policies and praxis.
So, do you mean that the Zionists can make it?
Like, if there actually exists an alternative to Zionism in Israel?
That's good, but there are statistics that whilst there are protests against Netanyahu as a person and some of the legislation that he is propagated, particularly the status of courts and interference with the judicial process, etc. That divides Israel, and then there are radical groups who protest against all that. But also statistics show that about 83% of the population support the genocide.
83?
83%. So that doesn't hold out all that much hope for an alternative. Unfortunately, the Labour Party has become a very minor force in Israeli politics, I think. And what little there is of the Labour Party is also Zionist. So where is the alternative? Yeah. I think by stages the only solution will be the single state solution, a fully democratic state which a fully democratic state that accepts all religions, all ethnicities as equal, and all faiths and none, and those who cannot put up with that, and there will be a minority, I imagine, of the most extreme Zionists will just have to leave if they cannot accept a democratic majority that is not maybe will be a Palestinian majority.
Any more questions? Any more questions?
You or people close to you have any contact with any of the Jewish activists in Israel that maybe are against the war or against Zionism, even if it's like a small group of them? And yeah, what's your opinion and yeah, any information?
Well, my group or myself, we don't have direct contact, but I do know people who do, and yes, who know. But there are such people, but they are not in a big organized entity, and they have to watch themselves in any case, because the majority is against them. And yes, there are a few people who are sickened by what's going on, but they're not a reliable force politically.
Any more questions?
So you were talking about some of your Zionist family members, and I guess I wanted to ask, what do you think that is the reason that you personally didn't fall for the propaganda? And because I would, at least in the early years, I would understand that maybe you would need some like feeling of security or something, and I guess that was the thing that Israel was supposed to offer. So I guess I would be interested, what's the reason why you didn't fall for it?
Why I didn't become Zionist? Like
Yeah.
Well, I come from essentially left-wing family. This must have helped. As I mentioned earlier, my father was taken to Belgium, and when he returned, and my uncle, two uncles who also returned, not from Belgium but from Theresienstadt, which is where they were liberated. On arrival to Hungary, they immediately joined the Communist Party, because all of them felt that the communists in Hungary, at any rate, were the most reliable resistors. So I was brought up in a household where it was left-wing politics. During the Stalinist period, we had lots of disappointments about what communism in practice could be. And I was myself a supporter of Imre Nagy and the sort of reform movement, reform communist movement. And in fact, when I got involved with the 1956 uprising, which started more or less in my university, the uprising was to reform the party and the regime. Socialism with a human face, rather like Dubček's initiative. And interestingly, there was no popular feeling or demand in 1956 during the uprising for return into private hands any of the nationalized factories or schools or anything really. It wasn't for a regime change in that sense. They just didn't want corrupt leaders anymore, which I'm afraid the leading group of leaders were guilty about show trials, all kinds of things, and they were completely undermined by Khrushchev's reforms and de-Stalinization. So directly from there, when I came to this country, I mean to UK, from Hungary after the uprising and the disappointment of it. I was, by that time, I was quite fed up with politics, to be honest. And there were so many disappointments and unpleasant experiences. So I concentrated on my professional life. I was and am an architect. And not until Tony Blair appeared and there was a sense of rebirth of the left that I got involved again in politics. And of course he disappointed us a great deal. But I remained on the left wing, if you like. And luckily my local MP was somebody also on the left, and so it was okay to work in the Labour Party. None of this had allowed diversion into the right-wing Zionism, and that's how I escaped.
Thank you. So if there are no... Yes?
Just a remark. I just want to correct it. If it's correct, of course. You said 83% of the society, of the Israeli society, they are with, for the genocide.
Yeah.
The Israelis.
Yes.
The Israelis, yes.
Yeah.
It's really. Well, what's about the democratic world, about European Union? They don't know. It's just a secret in this room.
Sorry, I didn't understand the last one.
What you said, 83%.
Of the Israelis?
Of the Israelis, yes. It's a nation somewhere they are live. 83% of those people they are for genocide for
Yeah.
another nation or another people.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, maybe
And that
more,
was-
maybe more. Yes.
Yeah,
What's the
but
question?
what we were living just listen this and keep it secret.
It's on
It's
the
not-
internet.
it's not-
It's
it's not-
an
Yeah, but
opinion
it's-
poll. An opinion poll.
No,
Just-
opinion.
Yeah, opinion poll, but it is, well, opinion poll. The poll you are using in Europe, somebody has 40%, then...
No. These are local
Yeah,
discoveries.
maybe-
It's not.
Israel is
It's not disputed.
I mean, why in Europe? Because, I mean, the main key in their hands to stop supporting such state or state of Israel. If they will just talk about this openly and to show to their nations in Europe what they are saying that we are democracy, it is a kind of hypocrisy. It's a kind of the worst situation for another. They're genociding another people, and
You can in Czech
all of us
language.
were just listening and.
She will translate it. You can in Czech language.
Well, regarding Europe, we
Just give
don't need statistics. We can see what's going on, and every day we hear the number of people killed. We see the systematic destruction of a whole country, and the question is, if we see all that, why don't we do more? And that's a very good question. Yes, I think, although we protest, it's not in proportion to what is needed. You are absolutely right about that. And that is why the only thing we can practically do is to grow our numbers, increase the threat against the ruling circles, if you like.
Okay. I think we already took hour and a half.
He
There's
wants one question.
I was not sure if you were.
I am sorry. I just want to ask, who paid the worst after the war? After the war, the worst got for the Palestinians. Why? Because the Europeans, when the war finished, well, the Jews were forbidden to travel to United States. Was forbidden. Europeans, so also they don't want them to be there here. So they thought they choose Palestine because, and that now the Palestinians paid the worst and from all of this, from the beginning to the end.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, you're completely right. The Holocaust was a European affair. It was created and executed by Europe, and the people who suffered most from it afterwards were the Palestinian people. And that's correct. And it's totally unjust, because they said even the United Nations declaration of creating the Israeli state was wrong and unjust. The assumption was that here was a people without a state, and a state without people, which was land. And that was a lie, a complete travesty of truth. And that is why what happened to the Palestinians and Nakba, and the continuation of the Nakba right through until the Nakba right now, is the most unjust outcome that could be on a people who had nothing to do with the Holocaust. You are absolutely right.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I will thank you, and hopefully you will join us in another event and maybe even action. Oh, did you hear me? Děkujeme vám.